1923, Cairo, Egypt. Inside the Continental Hotel, a wealthy British lord lay in a coma. His body was racked with a high fever, his breathing heavy and strained. At exactly 1:55 a.m., he took his final breath. At that very moment, something inexplicable happened. The entire city of Cairo was suddenly plunged into darkness as the power grid failed. Lightning streaked across the sky, illuminating a city in total blackout. Thousands of miles away, back in England, the Lord's loyal dog began to howl uncontrollably. Moments later, the animal dropped dead. Only months earlier, this man had done the unthinkable. He had unsealed a 3,000-year-old tomb. Carved into the entrance was a chilling warning. Death shall come on swift wings to him who disturbs the peace of the Pharaoh. The prophecy proved to be terrifyingly accurate. Over the next 6 years, 22 people connected to the tomb met mysterious ends. A radiologist died without warning. The father of a 78-year-old secretary leaped to his death from a 7th-story window. But the most baffling clue came when a scientist performed an autopsy on the 3,000-year-old mummy itself. What he discovered defied all logic. The world came to know this legend as the Curse of the Pharaoh. Hey everyone, our story begins just a few months before those mysterious deaths. It was November 1922, in the heart of Egypt's desolate Valley of the Kings. British archaeologist Howard Carter and his team were painstakingly digging through layers of ancient sand and heavy stone. For years, Carter had been obsessed with a single mission: finding a pharaoh whose very name had been erased from the pages of history. That forgotten ruler was Tutankhamun. Carter wasn't your typical elite archaeologist. His father was an animal painter who created portraits for the British aristocracy. Because Carter had been sickly as a child, he never received a formal education. He inherited only one real tool from his father: a paintbrush. Fate stepped in when a wealthy lord noticed 17-year-old Carter's watercolors and invited him to Egypt. That sponsor was Lord Carnarvon, a wealthy British aristocrat. Over the previous 15 years, Carnarvon had poured roughly £50,000 into Carter's search. In today's money, that is a staggering $6 to $7 million. And after 15 years of digging, they had found absolutely nothing. This was Carter's last stand. Carnarvon had made it crystal clear this was the final season. If they didn't strike gold this time, the funding would be cut for good. On November 4th, 1922, as Carter arrived at the excavation site, he was met with a strange, heavy silence. His foreman rushed over with incredible news. While digging, they had uncovered a step cut directly into the bedrock. Carter's heart began to race. He immediately ordered his men to dig faster. By the afternoon of November 5th, the debris had been completely cleared, revealing a full stairway, 10 feet high and 6 feet wide. As they reached the 12th step, they saw it: a massive sealed door. The door was covered in ancient plaster and bore the unmistakable seal of Anubis, the official royal seal of the Valley of the Kings. This was the ultimate discovery. It was the definitive proof of a royal tomb. But one chilling question remained: whose tomb was it? Over the years, about 60 tombs had been discovered in the Valley of the Kings, but there was a problem. Almost every single one of them had been stripped bare by grave robbers centuries ago. On November 24th, the team finally cleared all 16 steps. Now, a name was clearly visible, stamped into the sealed door: Tutankhamun. Seeing those hieroglyphs, Carter knew he had done it. He was standing at the threshold of the very pharaoh he had been hunting for years. This wasn't just another empty chamber. It was the door to history itself. November 26th, 1922. This was the day Carter would later describe as the most incredible moment of his life. With trembling hands, he carved a tiny hole into the sealed door. Immediately, a rush of hot, stagnant air escaped from the chamber, making his candle flicker in the darkness. As his eyes slowly adjusted to the shadows, a faint, golden shimmer began to emerge. Standing behind him, breathless with anticipation, Lord Carnarvon asked, "Can you see anything?" Carter replied with 3 words that would become legendary. "Yes, wonderful things." Inside lay a 3,000-year-old treasure trove. The tomb contained a staggering 5,539 objects. There was a death mask forged from 22 pounds, 10 kilograms of solid gold, and a ceremonial dagger crafted from a meteorite that had fallen from space. There was a coffin of pure gold, and strangely, 130 walking sticks. Everything was perfectly preserved, resting exactly where it had been placed 3 millennia ago. It was the single greatest archaeological find in human history, but as the news of the discovery broke, a series of chilling events began to unfold. In the early days of the excavation, something happened that sent shockwaves through the local Egyptian community. Carter kept a golden canary at his home, a bird known for its vibrant color and song. One afternoon, Carter sent his assistant back to the house on an errand. As the assistant stepped through the door, he was met with a blood-curdling scream. He rushed toward the birdcage and froze in horror. Inside the cage was a cobra, the deadly serpent of the Nile. Hanging lifeless from its jaws was Carter's golden canary. Imagine the terror of that sight. A cage meant for a songbird, now occupied by a venomous killer. The news spread across Egypt like wildfire. For the locals, this wasn't just a freak accident. It was a divine warning. In ancient Egypt, the cobra was the uraeus, the ultimate symbol of royal power and the protector of the pharaohs. To the Egyptians, the message was clear. The pharaoh was striking back. The rumors began to swirl immediately. People whispered that the cobra was the pharaoh's messenger, taking revenge for the violation of his tomb. They warned that something far more terrible was coming. Just a few months after the discovery, on March 6th, Lord Carnarvon was bitten on the cheek by a mosquito. It seemed like a minor annoyance, but fate had other plans. The next morning, while shaving, he accidentally nicked the bite with his razor. In the sweltering Egyptian heat, the open wound became a breeding ground for bacteria. Flies landed on the cut, worsening the infection until it turned into full-blown blood poisoning. As Carnarvon's fever spiked, his doctors pleaded with him to stop drinking and follow a strict recovery plan. But Carnarvon, stubborn to the end, brushed off their warnings and opened another bottle of wine from his private estate. It was a fatal mistake. On April 5th, 1923, at the Continental Hotel in Cairo, at exactly 1:55 a.m., Lord Carnarvon took his last breath. But it wasn't just the death itself that was shocking. It was the terrifying events that surrounded it. Just 12 days before he passed, novelist Marie Corelli published a chilling warning in the Daily Express. She claimed an ancient book foretold a severe punishment for anyone who disturbed a sealed tomb. The warning came true with terrifying precision. At the exact moment Carnarvon died, the entire city of Cairo was plunged into a total blackout. Engineering experts were baffled. There was no technical explanation for why the power grid collapsed. When the creator of Sherlock Holmes claimed the curse was real, the media went into a frenzy. Headlines like "The Curse of the Pharaoh" and "The Curse of King Tut" exploded across newspapers worldwide. The legend was born. But then the bodies started piling up. Each new death was more bizarre and more terrifying than the last, turning a historical discovery into a global nightmare. The common thread in the legend of this curse is simple. We fear what we don't understand. Because people couldn't explain these mysterious deaths, they labeled them a curse.
The headlines were already buzzing, but this was just the beginning. As a series of mysterious deaths unfolded, the media grew more sensational with every passing victim. First, there was American financier George J. Gould. After visiting the tomb, he was struck by a violent fever and died the very next day. The headline screamed, "Another victim of the Pharaoh." Next came British industrialist Joel Wool. Shortly after his visit to the site, he too was claimed by a fatal fever. The media wasn't holding back now. Tut's curse claims third life. The tragedies didn't stop there. Aubrey Herbert, the half-brother of Lord Carnarvon, died within just 6 months. Then Sir Archibald Douglas Reed, the radiologist who performed the first X-ray on the mummy, died suddenly and without warning. It seemed like anyone who even looked at the boy king was marked for death.
The list of victims continued to grow. Carter's key team member Arthur Mace, Professor Breasted, and even 2 reporters from the Times were added to the grim tally. Whether it was a museum official or a world-renowned Egyptologist, the media didn't care about their age or medical history. Every time someone connected to the project passed away, the Daily Mail and the Morning Post screamed the same headline: "The curse has claimed another." But the story's greatest irony involves Arthur Weigall. He was the special correspondent who did more to promote the legend of the curse than anyone else. In a bizarre twist of fate, Weigall himself contracted a fever in Egypt and died. He became victim number 21, metaphorically killed by the very myth he helped create. However, the most horrific tragedy was yet to come. In 1929, Richard Bethel, Lord Carnarvon's personal secretary, died of a sudden heart attack when his 78-year-old father, Lord Westbury, received the news at his London apartment. He was overcome with grief, or perhaps something darker. He walked to his 7th-story window and leaped to his death. By late 1929, the toll was staggering. 22 people linked to the tomb were dead. Out of the 22 deaths, 13 were people who had actually stepped inside the tomb. Then, a discovery was made that sent shockwaves through the world. In 1925, during the autopsy of Tutankhamun's mummy, Dr. Douglas Derry found a small, round lesion on the pharaoh's cheek. It was located in the exact same spot where the insect had bitten Lord Carnarvon. Same place, same cheek. Separated by 3,000 years, the ancient king and the modern lord shared the same fatal mark. After this, the media went into a total frenzy. The Morning Post, Daily Mail, and Daily Express all screamed the same warning. The curse is real. The news raced around the globe. The message was clear. Anyone who dared to disturb this grave would find only death. To truly understand the curse, we have to go back to the beginning. We need to know who Tutankhamun really was and how his tomb managed to stay hidden for 3,000 years. Tutankhamun was born in 1341 BC, during one of the most violent and unstable periods in ancient Egyptian history. From the moment he took his first breath, his life was in jeopardy. For millennia, Egypt had worshipped a vast pantheon of gods, but Tutankhamun's father, the radical pharaoh Akhenaten, upended everything. He rejected the old gods and declared there was only one, Aten, the sun disk. Akhenaten didn't just change the religion. He shuttered the temples, stripped the powerful priests of their rank, and attempted to rewrite the DNA of the kingdom. It was a massive social experiment, and it failed spectacularly. An ancient inscription from Tutankhamun's reign, known as the Restoration Stela, paints a grim picture. It tells us that after Akhenaten, the country was in total shambles. The people believed the gods had abandoned Egypt. Temples were in ruins, and the social fabric was torn apart. In the midst of this wreckage, following his father's death, an 8-year-old boy was placed on the throne. His original name was Tutankhaten, which literally translates to the living image of Aten.
The young pharaoh eventually changed his name to Tutankhamun, meaning the living image of Amun, signaling a return to the old gods. But his reign was tragically short. At just 18 or 19 years old, King Tut was dead. For decades, his death was a mystery. In 1968, an X-ray of his skull revealed a dark spot at the base of his head, leading many to believe he had been murdered. But the truth found in his DNA was even more disturbing. In the Egyptian royal line, inbreeding was a standard practice. For generations, pharaohs married their own siblings to keep the bloodline pure. But as we know from biology, the genetic fallout of this is devastating. Tutankhamun was a victim of his own lineage. He suffered from a severe club fit, leaving his legs so deformed that he couldn't take a single step without support.
This explains why his tomb was filled with 130 walking sticks. He also battled Kohler's disease, a rare bone disorder that causes excruciating pain, making every movement a struggle. When scientists finally analyzed his mummy, they also found traces of malaria. Today, experts believe it wasn't a single blow to the head that killed him, but the brutal combination of genetic defects, bone disease, and infection. He didn't die as a powerful god. He died as a frail teenager who could barely stand. 13 of them were the ones who had opened the tomb themselves.
In the grand scheme of Egyptian history, Tutankhamun was considered so insignificant that the pharaohs who followed him did something unthinkable. They scrubbed his name from every official record. He was effectively erased from history. But ironically, that erasure was his greatest protection. Because the world forgot he existed, grave robbers never went looking for him. For 3,000 years, his tomb sat in total silence, untouched and unknown. It wasn't until 1922 that Tutankhamun was truly revived. Suddenly, he became more famous across the globe than he had ever been during his actual reign. His legacy was finally fulfilled, but at a terrifying price. Think about everything we've covered so far. The 22 mysterious deaths, the sudden blackouts, the omens, and that chilling identical mark on the faces of the dead king and the living lord. If I stop the video right here, you'd probably walk away convinced that the curse of the pharaoh was 100% real.
But now, I'm going to tell you something that flips this entire story on its head. And honestly, the truth is much more shocking than any ancient curse. Remember that famous inscription? The one that warns, "Death shall come on swift wings to him who disturbs the peace of the king"? Newspapers at the time claimed there was a clay tablet at the tomb's entrance with those exact words. They even accused Howard Carter of hiding it so his workers wouldn't quit in terror. But when experts finally analyzed the text, they noticed something bizarre. The phrasing didn't sound like ancient Egyptian at all. It sounded like the dramatic prose of a novelist. Specifically, it sounded exactly like the words of Marie Corelli. As it turns out, the inscription was a complete fabrication. Decades later, the truth finally came out. Richard Adamson, the tomb's head of security, confessed that when a reporter asked him about ancient curses during the dig, he didn't correct them. Instead, he just gave a quiet, knowing smile and let the journalist run with it. One smile. That's all it took. The world's most famous curse wasn't carved in stone by ancient priests. It was born from the imagination of a reporter and the strategic silence of the excavation team. The inscription never existed. It was the ultimate piece of 1920s fake news. German Egyptologist Professor Steindorf decided to look at the cold, hard facts. After investigating every single cursed death, his conclusion was simple. There wasn't a single shred of evidence linking them to the tomb. But science had an even more fascinating explanation. In 1963, Dr. Ezzedine Taha discovered that many tomb workers were suffering from a fungus called Aspergillus niger. This mold had survived inside the sealed mummies for thousands of years. Once inhaled, it causes severe respiratory inflammation. The curse wasn't magic. It was a biological infection that today could be cured with simple antibiotics. Ironically, right after Dr. Taha held a press conference to debunk the curse, he died in a car accident.
Still, the data doesn't lie. A 2002 study by the British Medical Journal compared 44 Westerners who were in Egypt during the discovery. They found zero difference in the survival rates between those who entered the tomb and those who didn't. In fact, investigator James Randi pointed out that the cursed group lived to an average age of 73, actually outliving the general population at the time. If anything, the pharaoh's curse was making people live longer.
What about the blackout in Cairo? Egyptologist Dr. Joyce Tildesley noted that in the 1920s, Cairo's power grid was notoriously unreliable. It was a pure coincidence. The story of the dog, Susie, she died 4 hours after Carnarvon and thousands of miles away. The timelines don't even match up. Even the identical mark on the mummy's cheek was likely a sensationalized claim by the Morning Post, a newspaper that was bitter over losing the exclusive rights to the story. They weren't practicing journalism. They were selling a ghost story. The ultimate proof, however, lies in the survivors. Evelyn, Carnarvon's daughter, and one of the first people inside the tomb, lived until 1980, reaching the age of 78. Douglas Derry, the man who actually performed the autopsy on the mummy, lived to be 87. And then there's our main character, Howard Carter. He was the man who actually breached the seal and pulled the king from the earth. He lived for another 16 years, eventually dying of cancer at 64. Whenever he was asked about the curse, he had the same simple answer: I'm still alive. Ancient Egyptians believed that a person only truly dies when their name is no longer spoken. Tutankhamun's successors tried to erase him from existence, and for 3,000 years, they succeeded.
But then, a painter's son brushed away the sand and gave this 18-year-old king a second life. Today, Tutankhamun is the most famous pharaoh in history. His name will never be forgotten. And perhaps, somewhere across time, Tutankhamun is saying the exact same thing Howard Carter did. Because of you, I am still alive.